And I now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Спасибо, госпожа председатель.
Thank you, Madam President. The Kiev regime calling for this meeting, supported by its Western backers, proves that the Ukrainian president, whose term has expired, not only has not yet stopped tilting at North Korean windmills, so to speak, but has been giving the efforts particular importance in its strategy to provoke NATO countries to up the ante in the conflict with Russia. We think commenting on the new absurd accusations based as before on conjecture and phobias are to be pointless. Everything has been said at the previous meeting on this ridiculous subject on the 30th of October. Therefore, we'd like to focus today on the real aims of the Kiev authorities' propaganda and smear campaign. We've talked about this repeatedly, and all of our forecasts have come true. The bankrupt Zelensky regime needs at any cost to drag NATO countries into a direct conflict with Russia on the battlefield. With any other scenario, it would be facing a irreversible and humiliating defeat that, as demonstrated in the failed Kursk escapade of the Ukrainian head honcho and the clear collapse of the front in Donbass that has been pointed out by all military experts. Even Western news agencies have recognized that just last week alone, Russian troops liberated 235 square kilometers of territory. That is a record for 2024. The most powerful regions are collapsing that were set up by Kiev in 2014. In the ranks of the Ukrainian military, there's clear panic. The forced mobilized soldiers are fleeing en masse from their positions, and lying to his people is something that the actor Zelensky, who has usurped authority in violation of his constitution, is finding increasingly difficult. The citizens of Ukraine are fleeing his rule abroad if they're able to do so, or they're holing up at home so they can't be caught by military patrols who are throwing them into bloody battles, irrespective of their age or health. There's another catastrophic trend for the Kiev authorities, the mass return to former Ukrainian territories that are now under the control of Russia, of those people who lived there up until 2022, but decided now, or at the time succumbing to propaganda, to evacuate to the west. Just a few days ago, the Ukrainian authorities said that such returnees are now 150,000 people, and 50,000 of them have come back to Mariupol, which has been rebuilt. Basically, the population of that city has now returned, and this is very indicative. This is shocking information for Zelensky and his clique. But something that's even more shocking is the reasons why people are moving to Russia. This, inter alia, includes the poor treatment from Ukrainian-speaking compatriots, discrimination based on language and faith, the authorities not keeping their promises for socio and economic support, and widespread corruption and a lack of desire to engage in this inhumane regime. In other words, the Ukrainians are rejecting all the glamour of democracy that the sponsors of the Kiev regime are proclaiming so much in their statements. What kind of authority can tolerate this? And let's think about cooperation with the new American administration. The likelihood of who's coming to power is something which Zelensky tried very hard to ignore. He even violated diplomatic niceties. And even if we're to lay to one side the prediction that Donald Trump will cut assistance to Ukraine, which for the Ukrainian army would essentially be a death sentence, it's becoming clearer that he and his team will, in any case, conduct an audit of the assistance provided to Kiev. And this prospect for the main Kiev corrupt boss and its subordinates is the most frightening scenario, because over some 3 years now, they have plundered so much that the Western experts' hair is standing on its end. In the UK press last week, there was a publication about theft by Ukrainian civil servants directly linked to the office of the Ukrainian president. involved in so-called restoration of the Ukrainian energy infrastructure. The reports talk about a number of mega corrupt officials who are claiming that Russian strikes on these facilities means that war writes everything off. But this corruption and money laundering in the army is something that Ukrainian servicemen are always complaining about, and it's increasingly difficult for the authorities to be quiet about this. It's clear that many defense companies who on paper have received millions of dollars don't actually exist in actual fact. The former Labour Minister of Poland, Piotr Kulpa, in an interview admitted that about 30 to 50% of Western assistance to Ukraine has been plundered right from the beginning and consistently. From these resources, according to him, really equated to the annual budget of Ukraine. And quite clearly, this is just the tip of the iceberg. Can you imagine what scale of theft that we're talking about, sanctioned and backed from the very top? It is not surprising that the Ukrainian authorities are not taking any steps to conduct any audit whatsoever. And the only way of doing this is to provoke an escalation whereby all of these other things seem to be trifling in comparison. And the outgoing American administration is actively egging it on in doing this, and it's trying as much as it can to make a mess, both in Russia and with the new team in the White House. There's nothing surprising here. It takes two to tango, so to speak, in international corruption, and therefore the Biden team most likely really doesn't want to engage in financial checks. Therefore, that is the reason for all this fear-mongering regarding North Korean troops, just like it was previously with Iranian missiles. It's interesting what the West is going to come up with next. Maybe there's going to be Martians or little green aliens. It doesn't really matter. The main thing is to make an accusation. Distinguished colleagues, it's possible that these maneuvers of the Ukrainian corruptioneers and their Western conspirators might have gone unnoticed if, trying to destroy their tracks, they had not challenged peace throughout the whole world and had not, irrespective of what country you live in, placed the world on the brink of a global nuclear conflict. This is precisely what happened after the Biden administration and right after many of its European satellites authorized the Ukrainian army to use long-range missiles far inside Russia, and Zelensky has engaged in this. We saw this because we've had 2 rounds of such strikes. On the 19th of November, 6 ATACMS missile attacks that were made in the US were used, and on the 21st of November, there was a combined missile attack with a Storm Shadow made in the UK and the HIMARS in the US. They struck military targets in Bryansk and Kursk. They did not achieve their targets thanks to our anti-missile defense. However, as we've repeatedly underscored, the West, from that moment, provoked a regional conflict in Ukraine that has now taken on a global nature. In response to the use of American and UK long-range weapons, on the 21st of November, the Russian armed forces conducted a combined strike on a military-industrial complex in Ukraine. For the first time, a new IRBM Russian missile system was used with non-nuclear hypersonic equipment. The effectiveness of such weaponry that has no analogy is something that that Western specialists assisting Ukraine can tell you about. However, the Zelensky regime did not take on board our warning and decided once again to test our resolve. Yesterday, on the 25th of November, the Russian Defense Ministry said that over the past 3 days, the Ukrainian army struck using Western missiles Kursk region and used 12 ATACMS missiles, and most of them exploded. However, There was not any major casualties. What else can we say? Well, let's just wait and see. Every wave of escalation from the West is going to be decisively responded to. I will be frank. We believe that it is our right to use our weapons against military facilities of those countries who allow the use of weapons against our facilities. So we're talking about the hypersonic weaponry today. There is the American anti-missile defense system in Europe. They cannot capture these. And we've warned you about this, but you've made your choice. We have said repeatedly that we are prepared to engage in negotiations. We have put forward specific proposals, and most recently in June this year. However, the Kiev head honcho and the West, time after time, have favoured escalation. So is that your deliberate decision? Well, then it is completely shocking. Distinguished colleagues, in our opinion, this deliberate escalation from the US and its allies is something that we should be discussing today in the Security Council, because the global conflict that they are likely to provoke with today's weaponry is not going to spare anyone. The representative of the Kiev regime, of course, is not going to say anything about this, because all Ukrainian diplomacy wants to do right now is save the skin of Zelensky and its clique. And even if that means plunging the whole world into war, we would urge each and every one of you to think about this and not to make the mistake and to choose your priorities very carefully. Thank you very much indeed. We note a significant increase in the number of civilian casualties and damage to civilian infrastructure. We recall that attacks against civilians or civilian objects are prohibited. All parties must strictly respect international humanitarian law, in particular the rules governing the conduct of hostilities, and ensure the protection of the civilian population and respect for human rights. Secondly, we remain concerned that nuclear safety and security conditions remain precarious, particularly at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. All Ukrainian nuclear facilities are endangered by ongoing attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure.
Russia ignored the repeated calls of the international community and once again carried out a large-scale missile attack on Ukraine, which caused the casualties of innocent civilians. We must not look away from this new worsening situation. Russia is continuously attacking Ukraine using weapons supplied by DPRK, violating the relevant Security Council resolutions. North Korea's troops have been deployed to Russia, and they are now engaged in combat against Ukraine. Attempts to change the status quo by force would never succeed. Allowing such actions would have worldwide repercussions, affecting everyone in the future. The international community must act to stop the aggressor, not to seek a false peace or to reward the aggressor. This is not a matter of choosing sides between Ukraine or Russia. It is a question of either upholding or disregarding the UN Charter. Japan once again strongly demands that Russia withdraw from Ukraine immediately and unconditionally. Japan continues to stand with Ukraine.
It does again today against the logic of confrontation and polarization that prevails in this conflict. Escalation could lead us to uncontrollable and unpredictable situations that no one wants to happen. It is high time to reverse the trend and favor diplomacy, dialogue, and negotiation. Only dialogue and negotiation can lead us to a ceasefire and stop the bloodshed. Only dialogue and negotiation can bring peace and security to Ukraine, to Russia, and to the whole region. It is critical that both parties choose the path of de-escalation and engage directly or indirectly in genuine dialogue and negotiation.
Peace is achieved not among friends, but between conflicting parties. In this regard, genuine peace requires overcoming hostility, bridging divides, and fostering dialogue where mistrust and animosity have taken root.
And there is one country that has been attacked, Ukraine, which has a right under the UN Charter to defend its independence and territorial integrity. France stands alongside the people of Ukraine by providing military support which allows them effectively to implement their right to self-defense. Let us remember that this right includes the possibility to strike military sites in Russia when they are used to carry out this war of aggression against Ukraine. Ukraine must be able to defend itself and, when it wishes, to begin negotiations to find a viable peace.
Starting about August last year, the DPRK has shipped about 20,000 containers to Russia. To date, it is estimated that Pyongyang has provided approximately 9.4 million artillery shells. Furthermore, North Korea has recently transferred not only munitions, but also artillery launch systems. My government estimates that around 150 units of 170 millimeter howitzers and 240 millimeter multiple rocket launchers have been delivered to Russia. About 11,000 North Korean soldiers have been dispatched to Russia, and some of them are now actively engaged in combat operations in the Kursk Oblast. While my government is investigating specific intelligence related to North Korean casualties, the estimated casualty toll remains unverified. North Korea's increasing involvement in Russia's war against Ukraine carries serious implications. First, with North Korean troops and weapons on the battlefield, the conflict between Russia and Ukraine is being internationalized and evolving into a broader confrontation. Russia can now rely on additional military resources and manpower from the DPRK to bolster its operational capabilities and sustain its military efforts. In fact, we are even facing the potential for an additional deployment of North Korean troops, as more personnel may be needed to supplement and maintain existing troop levels. Second, North Korea's full participation in the war provides Pyongyang with greater access to Russian resources and military technology. In return for sending its troops, my government assesses that the DPRK has received from Russia not only economic benefits, but also anti-aircraft missiles and equipment to reinforce its weak air defense systems. The DPRK may acquire advanced military technology, material, and equipment to advance its illegal nuclear program. With Russia's direct backing, an emboldened North Korea will likely intensify pursuit of its illegal nuclear ambitions and provocative actions, thus further destabilizing the Korean Peninsula and beyond. To reaffirm our steadfast position to support Ukraine's defending its people and territory in accordance with the UN Charter and international law. For our part, we will respond resolutely to any threat to our national security in cooperation with the international community.
Use of weapons that could exacerbate the situation further must be avoided. The time has come to stop the violence and destruction. Russian and Ukrainian citizens deserve to live in peace. The world cannot allow a larger scale conflict. The international community must redouble efforts to bring about the propitious conditions for a return to dialogue and for an immediate ceasefire.
Colleagues, last week we marked 1,000 days since Russia launched its illegal, full-scale invasion of Ukraine. We recalled the devastating impact the war has had upon the Ukrainian people and the world, and reiterated our steadfast commitment to ensuring Ukraine gets the support it needs to defend itself and to achieve a just and lasting peace in line with the UN Charter. President Putin has demonstrated time and again that he has no interest in such a peace. In recent weeks and months, Russia has intensified its attacks on Ukraine. First, it has stepped up the use of indiscriminate glide bombs against Ukrainian cities. Last week, the UN announced that the number of civilians killed since February 2022 had reached over 10,000, with over 18,500 injured. Second, Russia has intensified its deliberate targeting of civilian energy infrastructure. This is a war crime, and it puts the lives of millions of Ukrainians at serious risk during cold winter months. Third, Russia has used experimental weapons. Last week, it fired an intermediate-range ballistic missile on Dnipro. Ukraine is not a testing ground for new weapons. I could go on. But this pattern of reckless activity by Russia serves only to prolong the war and the suffering of Ukrainian people, whilst posing serious risks to international peace and security. There is only one aggressor here and only one country in breach of the Charter. To seek de-escalation, we must focus on deterring Russia from that aggression. No one wants peace more than Ukraine. But Ukraine needs to be able to defend its civilians from these brutal attacks. Ukraine has a right to self-defense under Article 51 of the UN Charter, and we will support them in their efforts to achieve a sustainable peace. I resume my function as President of the Council. I now give the floor to the representative of Ukraine.
Well, thank you, Madam President. Distinguished members of the Security Council, Assistant Secretary General Yencha, I also recognize here the residual presence of Putin's envoys in the permanent seat of the Soviet Union. I would like to thank the Ukraine presidency for convening this meeting that Ukraine requested in response to Russia's recent escalatory actions. These include the first use of an intermediate-range ballistic missile to strike the Ukrainian city of Dnipro and the use of DPRK troops in its war against Ukraine. The ongoing deployment of DPRK troops to support Russia remains one of the clearest indicators of Moscow's unwillingness to de-escalate, alongside the weapons supplies Russia has been receiving from Pyongyang for over a year. Since the Council's most recent discussion, the situation on the ground has escalated, and first clashes of the Ukrainian forces against DPRK servicemen already took place. As we informed earlier, the troops are fighting under assumed identities of Russia's Far East nationalities using forged documents. Primarily, they operate as combined arms units trained for action in the European theater of military operations. The DPRK is now entering the war in a fully fledged manner. According to available information, its current military contingent of 11,000 troops could quickly be increased to 100,000. The question of whether the Pyongyang regime truly requires such a substantial number of combat-trained servicemen solely to assist its Russian allies is rhetorical at best. The answer to this question is self-evident, and while it may be uncomfortable, acknowledging this reality is essential. Otherwise, an appropriate and adequate response would be unlikely. According to the publicly available information, the DPRK had sent more than 20,000 containers of artillery, missiles, and other conventional arms to Russia since August 2023 to replenish its dwindling weapons stockpiles. As reported by Ukraine's military defense intelligence, Pyongyang has supplied Moscow with 100 Kan-23 and Kan-24 short-range ballistic missiles. The first use of these weapons by Russia against Ukraine, including against residential areas and civilian infrastructure, was recorded at the end of 2023. In 2024, Ukraine has documented approximately 60 launches of such missiles, according for 1/3 of all ballistic missile attacks carried out by Russia this year. Furthermore, recent reports from the expert community point to satellite images that reveal the DPRK is expanding a manufacturing complex in the city of Khamkung. This industrial facility assembles Kan-23 short-range ballistic missiles, which Russia has used against Ukraine, including for targeting residential areas and civilian infrastructure. The satellite images reportedly taken in early October show the construction of what appears to be an additional assembly building, as well as a new housing facility likely intended for workers. Additionally, there have been recent reports that Russia received 170mm self-propelled howitzers and 240mm multiple rocket launch systems from the DPRK. Let me recall that the transfer of ballistic missiles, along with any other arms and related material from the DPRK to Russia, flagrantly violates multiple United Nations Security Council resolutions. The training by the Russian Federation of DPRK regular units, including those recently deployed in the Kursk region, constitutes a violation of Security Council Resolutions 1718, 1874, and 2270. In turn, DPRK soldiers providing or receiving any training or other assistance related to use of arms is also a violation of the mentioned resolutions. We reiterate that Pyongyang's support comes at a price, and this is an access to Russian technology in missile, nuclear, and other military programs. It is crucial to understand that this price is paid not so much by Russia, but by the world. Failure to act decisively will be far more costly in the long run than taking strong and timely measures today. We call on all responsible nations to take immediate actions to resolutely counterattack the Russian and North Korean regimes, from increasing sanctions pressure on Moscow and Pyongyang to maximizing Ukraine's capabilities within the framework of the victory plan presented by President Zelensky. At the same time, the Security Council and its 1718 Sanctions Committee should continue addressing the issue of non-compliance of the DPRK and the Russian Federation with relevant UN Security Council resolutions. In this regard, Ukraine also supports the monitoring and reporting on violations and evasions of the sanction measures by both regimes within other multilateral mechanisms, in particular, multilateral sanctions monitoring team established on October 16, 2024. Madam President, another escalatory move by Putin aimed at testing the world's resilience to Russia's nuclear blackmail occurred on November 21. On that day, the Ukrainian city of Dnipro suffered an attack by an intermediate-range ballistic missile capable of delivering weapons of mass destruction. According to an initial examination of remnants, it was the first time that such a missile has been identified on the territory of Ukraine. The missile was equipped with 6 warheads, each containing 6 sub-munitions. It moved along a ballistic trajectory which was only affected by aerodynamic resistance. Moscow's narratives following the strike, including comments by war criminal Putin, once again underscored Russia's intentions to persuade the global audience of its complete inadequacy, this time by showing readiness to kill Ukrainians not only with conventional, but also nuclear means. Ukraine calls on UN member states, in particular nuclear weapon states, to condemn Russia's irresponsible nuclear saber-rattling. In responding to this escalatory step, it is also important to remember that Putin's future actions will directly depend on the strength and resolve of our reaction. In effect, this modus operandi has always been simple and straightforward. If his blackmail succeeds and his opponent shows weakness or willingness to appease, a new and more severe escalation of violence and violations will inevitably follow. On the contrary, if adequate measures to deter Russia and reduce its aggressive potential are taken, Putin will stop. Therefore, the response to the Kremlin's current nuclear blackmail and threats must include tougher sanctions and increased military assistance to the party defending itself, its people, and the principles of the UN Charter. In this context, we do not accept concerns about strengthening Ukraine's capacities to strike military targets on Russian territory as alleged escalation. Such labeling either demonstrates a complete misunderstanding of conflict's nature and current developments on the ground, or serves as manipulation in the aggressor's interests. It was from Russian territory that the full-scale invasion began in February 2022. It is on Russian territory that new military units were being formed to occupy and destroy Ukrainian cities and kill Ukrainian people. It is on Russian territory that the production of deadly weapons is accelerating. Weapons that will be used not only against Ukraine, despite the illusions of those hoping to buy a few years of peace at the expense of Ukraine's existence. Finally, it is from Russian territory that missiles, drones, and guided aerial bombs are launched daily, killing Ukrainians and destroying our critical infrastructure. This includes drones from Iran and missiles from the DPRK, enabling these rogue states to test their weaponry. More than 11,500 missiles were launched against Ukraine since February 2022. More than 33,000 guided aerial bombs were deployed. Over the past 4 days alone, 495 UAVs were launched by Russia, along with Iskander ballistic missiles and Kh-5969 guided air-to-surface missiles. Among the targets that Russian forces attempt to strike are the transmission substations of our nuclear power plants. Following the Russian attack on November 17, the IAEA Director General stated that several electrical substations on which the NPPs depend had suffered further damage. In addition, the main power lines from 4 of the substations were disconnected. This poses a real and immediate threat to nuclear safety and security, not only for Ukraine, but for the entire continent. Strikes on Russian territory help reducing such war-related threats. Unlike Russia, Ukraine does not target residential areas, hospitals, or civilian infrastructure. Our goal is not to intimidate the Russian civilian population, but to weaken the ability of the Kremlin regime to threaten Ukraine and the world. Russian military command posts, airfields, artillery arsenals, missile deployment sites were among the most recent targets hit by the Ukrainian forces. Every target struck means a Ukrainian life saved, somebody's home or power station preserved. Ukraine will continue to exercise its inherent right to self-defense under Article 51 of the UN Charter. This right, I remind you, does not impose geographical limitations on defending against an armed attack. At the same time, Article 51 does not allow an aggressor to hide its violations under the guise of the right to self-defense, as self-defense applies in cases where an armed attack occurs or is imminent. In February 2022, as we all remember, the qualification of imminent was only applied to Russia's plans to invade Ukraine. the plans that Russia denied in this very chamber a week before the invasion at the level of its deputy foreign minister. Russia must understand that its every attempt to expand the war will have consequences. This serves to sober the aggressor state, disrupts its plans, and enforce it toward peace. A comprehensive, just, and lasting peace based on the UN Charter, not on deceitful appeasement reminiscent of Munich 1938. The former could be achieved through two things: helping Ukraine and increasing pressure on Russia, and if the latter prevails, the price for all of us would be far too high. One speaker today has said that he cannot help but wonder, can those caught in the war be reunited with their families? Is there anyone they can be thankful for? Can they have a happy and peaceful tomorrow? End of quote. The answer is yes. There are 141 countries in the General Assembly they can be thankful for. The countries who voted for the condemnation of the Russian aggression in March 2022. The answer is yes. There are 141 countries they can be thankful for who call a spade, who voted in February 2023 for the resolution on the principles of the UN Charter underlying just, comprehensive, and lasting peace in Ukraine, including Ukraine's territorial integrity within its internationally recognized borders. Yes, they can be thankful to dozens of countries that help Ukraine with air defense systems, with means to destroy military bases in Russia, where hundreds of missiles are launched to kill Ukrainian children, women, and men. And I want to conclude with my profound gratitude to all those countries that have been supporting Ukraine through almost 3 years of this bloody war. Thank you.
The recent attacks against Dnipro on the November 21st, targeting Ukrainian civilians and civilian infrastructure with the use of the modified RS-26 Rubesh intermediate-range ballistic missiles Oreshnik, capable of carrying nuclear warheads, represents a new level of danger in the conflict with Ukraine. This move, coupled with the revision of Russia's nuclear doctrine, constitutes another instance of nuclear saber-rattling, further undermining the global security architecture. Such behavior not only threatens the stability of Ukraine and the region, but also increases the risk of wider conflict and nuclear proliferation. The Kremlin's aim is clear: to intimidate Ukraine and its supporters and sway public opinion to deter international support, but this will not happen.
Dear colleagues, each of these actions separately constitute, once again, unacceptable escalations and serious breaches of international law. Russia must be held fully accountable for its violations.
In addition, recent reports of Russia recruiting cannon fodder from Yemen to fight in Ukraine only further displays Russia's escalatory course of action. It is highly alarming that military and mercenaries from all over the world are being recruited to fight in the heart of Europe to satisfy Russia's neocolonial and imperial ambitions.
As has been clarified on several occasions, the Ukrainian crisis was started by United States and Western forces that ignore legitimate security interests and the right to territorial integrity of Russia and pursued NATO's reckless eastward expansion under the ambition to maintain the hegemonic world order. It is none other than United States and Western forces that ruptured hard-won peace talks between Russia and Ukraine at the beginning of the event, and that caused announced civilian casualty and prolonged the crisis by systematically supplying the various lethal weapons to Kiev authority, obsessed with the pipe dream to deal a strategic blow to Russia. Just as fascisms in Europe and Asia collude with each other to throw the world into turmoil in the last century, the reactionary forces in the West and the East today, allied under the buttons of the United States, are now attempting to establish rapacious and tyrannical order across the world. The United States in particular is expanding nuclear-sharing military alliance system while escalating military pressure and provocation against the DPRK through deployment of its vast array of the strategic strike minion forces of the allies in the vicinity of our state. Such being the case, the United States is still picking holes on legitimate development of the relation between independent sovereign states by mastering its satellite forces. It cannot but mockery of an insult to the UN Charter. The United States is still picking holes on legitimate development of the relation between independent sovereign states by mastering its satellite forces. It cannot but mockery of an insult to the UN Charter. Under the Treaty on Comprehensive Strategic Partnership, which fully conformed to UN Charter and international law, the DPRK and Russian Federation are developing bilateral relations in all fields, including politics, economy, military, and culture, and maintaining contact with regard to each other's security and development of the situation. The DPRK will remain faithful to its obligation under the treaty and continue to strengthen and develop relations with the Russian Federation in order to defend fundamental interests of the peoples of both countries, contribute to regional and global peace and security, and realize international justice. The righteous international community should never tolerate such acts of the United States in its followers that infringe upon the sovereignty and disturb the peace in their attempt to obstruct development of the legitimate friendly relation between sovereign states and impose tragic war and catastrophic disaster. Rather, it should run out in the struggle to safeguard justice and equity, peace and stability. I thank you.
Ask for the floor to make a further statement. I give them the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. I apologize for taking the floor a second time. I just wanted to make a very general point and ask a question, if I may. To be clear, the deployment of DPRK troops to help Russia carry out its illegal war of aggression against Ukraine and the Ukrainian people has fundamentally changed the nature of this war, posing not only a growing threat to Ukraine, but also an increasing threat to broader European security. The United States will continue to take, and its allies, to take all steps necessary to help Ukraine defend itself and to ensure allied security. And my last point is just a question to the representative from the DPRK regime. It's a very simple question, and I think this council would appreciate a very succinct answer. Has DPRK deployed troops to Russia? Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of the United States for their statement. The representative of Ukraine has asked for the floor to make a further statement. I give them the floor.
Well, thank you, Madam President. I'm not going to comment the pulp fiction by North Korea edited by the Russian mission. But I forced myself to stay in this chamber out of respect to this institution and out of the need to look in the eyes of the representative of DPRK to tell him directly that he represents a criminal regime, that he represents the regime that helps another criminal regime, and that by the end of the day, sooner or later, you and your leadership will end up in the dock. And sooner or later, your people will be free, and then will enjoy democracy and freedom and liberty.
I thank the representative of Ukraine for their statement. The representative of the Russian Federation has asked for the floor to make a further statement. I give them the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. We regret the fact that the representative of the US is continuing to waste the valuable time of the Security Council, but listening to his conjecture and his smearing of countries that Washington doesn't like. Now, this is just the typical Anglo-Saxon thinking along the lines of highly likely. We repeatedly provided exhaustive clarifications. Our colleagues from DPRK today clearly laid out their position. So those who have ears, may they hear. If the US and its allies choose the path of escalation, and that is our conclusion, we see that from today's statements. They didn't want to talk about the real reasons for the wave of escalation, the green light that the Western donors of the Kiev regime has given to use long-range missiles within the Russian Federation. If the US and its allies chooses escalation, well, we're ready for that. But we would urge you to look at the very basis of common sense and have a long, hard think about the fact that we need a serious dialogue about the need to eradicate the root causes of the crisis. We've always been prepared to engage in that. So, our distinguished Western colleagues, the choice is yours. The whole world is waiting. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for their statement. The representative of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea has asked for the floor to make a further statement. I give them the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. I want to take a further reaction to the comment made by United States delegate. It is a legitimate right for DPRK to develop the relation with the Russian Federation. The treaty on comprehensive strategic partnership between DPRK and Russian Federation is fully conformed to international law and the UN Charter. Therefore, the DPRK will remain faithful to its obligation under that treaty. I thank you.